jam që je interesuar para që je interesuar, edhe të cip, nuk ka aty ndonjë kur gjatë të keqe, sinqerisht.
Do unë jam e mirë edhe për si janë rrogat këtu në vërtet?
Ku në qeveri?
Po.
Shifën qeveri është shumë e thjeshtë,
Mua ama mirë të se drita që shkoj 4 orë të bajnë në UBT, se Kosova e kishte atë mundën, po?
Nëse
Hi everyone. I'm Darian Stivy. Very good to meet you all. Hi everyone. I'm Darian Stivy. Very good to meet you all. So we're just waiting for a couple more people to join, and then we'll sort of give a bit of a briefing. Just so you know, at the moment, we are in a special room where people can't see us, except slightly weirdly, they can see us live streamed on YouTube simultaneously, but hopefully nobody is watching that at the moment. But we're in practice mode on Zoom, and as I said, in a couple of minutes, when some more of the panelists join, I'll then give us a little bit more of a briefing. So see you in a second. Hi all, I think we're beginning to get to a quorum. So I wonder if you'd mind all just putting on your screen so we just check that is all working effectively. We can see your videos. Hi Lotte.
Hi, I hope you can hear me.
Hear you very well indeed. How are you doing?
Good, how are you doing?
Yeah, very good, thank you. Very good.
Hello.
And Fatmi, hello.
Hello.
Hi.
Hello.
Hi, Christine. Or Christine.
Hello.
Hey there. Good to meet
Hi.
you.
Hola.
Hello. And then Kingsley, are you able to put your video on? Well, hopefully at least you'll be able to hear me. So we have quite a group of quite brilliant people on this webinar. So thank you all very much indeed for being willing to take part. Because we have quite a large group, what I'd like to do is try to make it really as interactive as possible. And the way to do that really is I'm going to come to you at the beginning and ask you to tell us about yourselves but sort of start in on your experiences of partnering during COVID-19, just to give a feel about how partnerships happened during COVID-19 that perhaps was different to normal times. And that's really what we're trying to get at, is how COVID-19 has really driven all sorts of collaboration at a speed that we perhaps have not seen before, but which we need if we are going to drive forward Agenda 2030. So the way that I'll do it is that Lotte's just will give an introduction at the beginning around the Partnership Accelerator. And then I will basically ask each of you to tell us a bit about your experiences, but it probably won't be everybody all at once. I'll probably do 3 of you, then maybe have a little bit of a discussion amongst people, and then the sort of the next 3. So we're going to sort of layer it a bit, but you'll have seen from the questions. The questions are really about the experiences of partnering during COVID-19. What we've learned from that in terms of being able to partner effectively and more rapidly for the future, and then what really needs to be in place to try and help make partnerships happen at scale and much more systematically. So we'll feel our way a bit with such a large panel, we'll feel our way a bit, but at any point, if there's something you want to add or you want to respond to somebody else's point, brilliant. That's what we'd like to have, as much sort of the interactive discussions as possible. We also want to be as sort of interactive with participants as we can. So we have a question and answer panel. And when you open that up, you will see that it kind of works in a slightly unusual way. But when somebody types in a question, it appears in the open section. And I don't know if you're all able to click the Q&A at the bottom. But once you've done that, you'll see that there'll be particular questions, and I will then sort of try and draw from some of those questions to then sort of ask them out, either to individual people or generally to the group. We also have the chat function, which we can use just within us as panelists. So if there's something that you want to say, if you want to draw my attention to something, then please put it in the chat, or even if you just sort of wave or put up your hand, I'll notice that, and then I'll draw the conversation to you. It's slightly tricky on Zoom with lots of people, but I think we can do it well. Any sort of questions?
Yes, thanks. This is all going to be recorded and publicly posted afterward. That's correct?
That's correct.
Darren?
Yes.
Thanks. What about the chat? Is that going to become public, or can we? Because sometimes people write just to each other in these chats.
Well, anything written to each other, we don't get to see anyway. So
okay.
It's only stuff that goes to everyone, I think, is recorded.
Okay, great.
But yes, good point.
Mm-hmm.
Although it's often amusing when you see, if you can see what people are writing confidentially to their friends, that's always funny.
Yeah.
Great. Any other?
They ask you, do you? I'm sitting right next to an air conditioner. Can you hear a sound in the background? Do I need to turn it off?
No, it's fine.
It's great. It's great. Okay. So in which case, I think that we have a few minutes just to sort of relax and prepare some thoughts on those 3 topic areas. And I will see you back here, I guess, in a couple of minutes before 1 p.m. UK time, 8 a.m. New York time. Hi, Ola.
Hello.
You can tell which one of us isn't necessarily going to be speaking on the panel, the relaxed one in the sunshine outside. I'm a bit envious, Ola.
This is my only office where I can be away from a screaming child. So I think this is good for all of us.
Yeah, so you wait till my screaming cat decides she wants to come in.
Darian, can I test the sharing of my screen? I'm supposed to show a PowerPoint presentation that Ola has kindly put together.
Super, yes, go ahead.
See it?
Yes.
Yep.
And if you go to view, then you can make that full screen. So on the top left, there's a thing that says it says File, Edit, View window. If you click on View.
File, Edit, top left, File, Edit, View.
Oh, sorry, top left of the Acrobat window, I meant.
Okay.
So if you want to try that again.
Okay.
And
View.
yeah, there.
Okay.
And there should be something like under page at the bottom. You see full screen mode, which is about almost towards the bottom. You keep going down. Keep going down. Keep going. One more. That's
Okay.
it. And with any luck, yeah, that's perfect.
Okay. Okay. Excellent. Let me try that one.
Super. Great. I'm going to stop your, okay, you've got that. Great. I saw Parfait for just a moment, so he is definitely around. Kingsley, we haven't seen you with the video at the moment, or heard that it's working, but hopefully that's going to all work perfectly as well. Parfait, you just missed where I was just talking about the fact it's going to be as interactive as possible.
Okay.
So what we'd like is lots of short interventions, rather than any sort of long intervention.
3 trees.
And yeah, and let's see how it goes.
All right.
And if as I said, anyone's got any questions, put it in chat. Otherwise, I guess I will see you in a few minutes. Feel free to go off.
Do you have a couple of questions? So the interventions, the early interventions are 3 minutes?
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't even have to be that long. I mean, if we can, basically for the sort of the early intervention will be around what you've seen in terms of partnering happening against COVID-19. And then the rest of the questions we'll do more as sort of interactive. So don't feel you have to answer all of the questions in your first intervention. Okay. So we'll do it in kind of a layered way. And so probably I will sort of ask about maybe 3 people to talk about what they've seen in terms of partnering against COVID-19. And then the next 3 people I'll probably say, ask if there's any other things that they want to add to that, and also then start talking about some of the lessons learned from those partnerships. So we're trying to sort of layer it a bit, and I'll try and bring in some of the thoughts and questions as well from the participants as we go through.
Darian, do we have any participants? I don't see anyone that have signed in, or is that coming at 2 p.m.? I mean, 8 a.m. sharp.
I have to press a button and then it'll happen. Okay.
Because now it's 10:02, so maybe you want to start that so they can sort of start coming to the virtual lobby, right?
Yes, I mean, basically, once I press the button, then they're all in. So people do feel free to turn off your sound and video for now, and then sort of come back in a couple of minutes before the hour, if you like.
Okay, thanks.
Perfect. I'll see you all in a bit. Thank you. Hi, good morning, good afternoon, depending on where you are, and welcome to this webinar around partnerships in COVID-19 and post-COVID-19. If I could ask our panelists kindly to put on their videos. So welcome to our set of panelists. And the session today is all around COVID-19 and how COVID-19 has really impacted and affected the world of international development, and how we can move from here to capitalize on the momentum of action towards building back better. My name is Darian Stibbe. I am the Executive Director of the Partnering Initiative. We are an international NGO based in the UK, striving to drive effective collaboration for sustainable development. And we work very closely with UNDESA and a number of other UN agencies, including the Global Compact represented here today, on the Partnership Accelerator, a major new program that we'll hear about in just a moment. Now, what we've seen from COVID-19 is a huge uprising in action. We have seen every citizen, every company, every organization, every government stand up and take action against COVID-19. And in many senses, COVID-19 has really demonstrated how we are all in it together, that we all have a role to play, that we all need to take action. And in some ways, that could be considered quite a positive element. Of course, COVID-19 at the same time has been described as the great revealer. It has shown the huge inequalities in our societies, the challenges and problems with the environment. So what do we have? We have the fact that we are now understanding even more strongly some of the real fractures in our society, and also a time when we have seen all sectors of society coming together. And so I guess the real question is, how can we seize the opportunity and build on the momentum of action in order to bring everyone around a common goal, in order to be able to sort of rebuild our societies towards far more prosperous economies, prosperous societies, and prosperous environment. And the SDGs, of course, provide that blueprint for us. In this webinar today, we're going to be asking 3 questions as we explore this issue. So the first is understanding what have we seen in terms of all sectors of society coming together in multi-stakeholder partnerships for action against COVID-19. The second question is looking at the experiences of developing these partnerships, many of which happened incredibly quickly. What can we learn from those experiences in order to be able to partner together rapidly for better recovery? And then the third question really is about, well, what can we do? What can governments do, particularly to foster an enabling environment that will really genuinely help to drive these partnerships for the SDGs? So we have an incredible panel from all different sectors of society. So we have from one of the member states, we have Mr. Fatmir Batiki, who's a special advisor of the cabinet of the president of the government of North Macedonia. We have a couple of colleagues from the UN, resident coordinators from Mauritius and Seychelles, Ms. Christine Omutoni, as well as from Liberia, Mr. Kingsley Opoku Amanning. We have people from business. Scott Ratson is the Director of Business Partners for Sustainable Development with the USCIB, the US Council for International Business Foundation, and Gabriela Ocampo from the UN Global Compact. And we have a colleague from academia, Mr. Parfait Elundu Enege, who is the Professor and Department Chair of Development Sociology at Cornell University, and importantly, a member of the independent group of scientists for the Global Sustainable Development Report. So we have that whole range of different stakeholders. And before we get into the discussion, I'd like to invite Lotte Tatinen, who's the Chief of the Outreach and Partnerships Branch of UNDESA, to introduce the Partnership Accelerator. Over to you, Lotte.
Thank you so much, Darian. And good afternoon, good morning, good evening to colleagues. It's such a pleasure for me to be here with you today to share with you about the ongoing work of a new capacity building project called the 2030 Agenda Partnership Accelerator that UNDESA together with partners launched last year. The objective of the 2030 Agenda Partnership Accelerator is to provide different actors, including governments, UN entities, and other stakeholders with the tools and skills that are needed for accelerating and scaling up effective partnerships to advance the SDGs in all countries. Throughout all the activities, the Partnership Accelerator aims to support an enabling ecosystem for partnerships. And what does this mean? It means, first of all, having in place an enabling policy environment that is supportive of collaboration and forging of partnerships. Secondly, ensuring that individuals and institutions are equipped with the skills needed to make successful partnerships happen. Thirdly, that partnerships are built in line with good practice and standards. And lastly, fostering national platforms and space that can help catalyze new partnerships and actions. Together with our partner, the Partnering Initiative that Darian is representing, we have recently launched 2 new publications that I'm showing here on the screen. Very briefly, these publications are the SDG Partnership Guidebook, which provides a wealth of guidance and tools on how multi-stakeholder partnerships at the country level can deliver concrete results and impact. And the second publication is a partnership platforms for the SDGs, which draws out good practices that are emerging from national partnership platforms that have proved to have great potential in accelerating progress towards the SDGs. Both these publications are available on our website at sustainabledevelopment.un.org. Another key feature of the Partnership Accelerator project are national partnership workshops, which provide an opportunity to bring actors and stakeholders together, build relations and synergies, and help identifying potential for new partnerships. These national workshops are being carried out in close collaboration with the UN resident coordinators at the national level, the national government, and other development partners, including business leaders, academia, and other stakeholders. When we prepare for these national partnership workshops, we recruit a local consultant to help develop a partnership landscape analysis to map out who are the key actors, sectors, and areas where new partnerships can be forged, and help adapt the workshop program to the national context. The first national workshop was held in Kenya last December. It was a great opportunity to bring together a diverse range of different national partners and actors and finding new synergies between sectors in Kenya. The other countries we are currently working to organize national workshops include Samoa, Maldives, Sri Lanka, Thailand, and Mexico. While we are committed to making these national workshops happen, we are closely monitoring the ongoing COVID-19 situation in terms of travel restrictions, and we are following, of course, any national guidance. To ensure that we don't lose any momentum, however, we're also looking at the possibility of holding virtual briefings with national stakeholders and developing different kinds of online training materials. As part of our work to adapt to the new realities, we are working on several fronts currently. Firstly, we have established an informal multi-stakeholder group on effective partnerships for COVID-19 that brings together relevant stakeholders to brainstorm and guide how partnerships can help countries address COVID-19 crisis in its aftermath. Secondly, DESA, as the Secretariat of the High-Level Political Forum, which is starting this morning, we are conducting an assessment of the countries that have taken part in the voluntary national review process, identifying innovative approaches that have been developed and used by governments, including in the area of stakeholder engagement and partnerships, and conducting a survey amongst these countries to understand how has the COVID-19 pandemic impacted their ability to engage stakeholders. We are also in the process of collecting new and innovative SDG acceleration actions, both globally and nationally. These SDG acceleration actions are intended to serve as inspiration, and they are showcased on our website in a searchable online directory that I hope you will all be able to visit. This website has this acceleration actions online database is again our main website, sustainabledevelopment.un.org. Finally, we're also developing additional research and guidance to trying to understand what are some of the best practices of partnerships in response to COVID-19 that we will undertake together with scientific community and other partners to inform future action. Dear colleagues, this side event is also an additional opportunity to inform our ongoing work around partnerships for COVID-19. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Lotta, very much appreciated. And just a couple of mentions. So what we suggest is that you switch to gallery view if you are watching this, because we are going to make sure this is something of a conversation. So if you're used to Zoom, then click on the top right. You will see 9 dots together to get gallery view. You can see us all at once. And then the second thing to mention is we would like to try to engage in all of the attendees as much as possible. So there is a chat function. So if at any point you have a question that you'd like to put to any of the panelists, or just want to just introduce something, please feel free to do so. I shall try to bring in as much as possible and much of the discussion as I can from attendees as well as the panelists. So with no further ado, I'd like to start with Fatmir and just sort of hear from you about your experiences in North Macedonia in terms of how have the sectors, business, government, civil society, people come together against COVID-19 in North Macedonia.
Okay. Thank you. First of all, thanks for the invitation and allowing us actually to present I would say a good example of how even during an emergency, a crisis, different stakeholders might come together and find out the right, I would say, recipe of how to overcome or mitigate a crisis. And actually the North Macedonia and the case that I will present is, I think, a good example for that. Yeah, your questions is related how to bring together different stakeholders, business, academia, I would say labor unions, etc. But we went through more of that, and actually since the beginning of the crisis, we invited all the international agencies as well to sit down and see who might be engaged in different ways. And here, let me express my gratitude to the UN country team in North Macedonia, because they actually made it possible to prepare the North Macedonia COVID comprehensive preparedness and response plans, which was the basis I would say, for us as a government to start thinking and preparing different measures. Along that, at the same time, we already had in place in North Macedonia several platforms for discussion, and that was Economic and Social Committee, as well as so-called public-private partnership platforma, which is a place where we meet with the private sector. But no matter of that, we established so-called Economic Social Council only for COVID-19, where we did invite from the first days the business community represented by chambers of commerce, the representatives of labor unions, representatives of academia, representative of different other fields in meaning of experts, eminent experts in the field of economy and public finance. A group consisted of 30 people, which was met periodically throughout the period of pandemia till now. And actually this, I would say, multi-stakeholder forum was a place for discussion and consultation, but as well proposing measures for the mitigating the crisis. We achieved to prepare 3 sets of measures as a response of pandemia, COVID-19, in order to allocate around 550 million euros, which is around 5% of GDP, national GDP in our country. Or I would say this was, and this is among the biggest ever plan to mitigate such a crisis in North Macedonia.
Great, thank you. No, well, yeah. I mean, we'll perhaps talk a little bit more about that in just a moment. But thank you. That's a really useful introduction about some of the fora that you need to put in place in order to sort of engage all of the sectors. I wonder if there might be sort of a couple of examples then of these types of multi-stakeholder partnerships, multi-stakeholder action. I don't know, Christine, are you able to share with us an example?
Yeah. Well, thank you very much. First of all, also, thank you for inviting us to share our experience. Yeah, for both Mauritius and Seychelles, I think one of the countries that have really dealt well with COVID, and I credit this to the strong partnerships that these countries managed to pull together and the openness in the country. So quickly, just to say that both countries, knowing the diversity of the UN and the high income status and all this, but irrespective of this, it's like the pandemic broke all these so-called taboos on partnerships. You know, things we were struggling with on the SDGs and brought the issues at the forefront such that everybody was able to come together, even at the government side, the government and the opposition, all the UN family, all the private sector, civil society, everybody. So we saw an example where the crisis mode brought solidarity, made things easier, flexible, easy to target. And I think the reason is that the UN immediately became the source of information, the center of the plan. We held the response plan. It was a health response. WHO was on top of things. The UNCT came together and everybody came to us for what to do, including the government and the private sector. A solidarity fund was immediately put in place. Yeah, so I could go on and on, but what I could just summarize, I know you want to have a debate, but the UNCT came together, the UN and the government came together, the UN and the development partners, our DPG development partners group, the UN and the private sector. Now we have launched the Global Compact Network, which had been so difficult to put together. But now, because of a common cause, we are able to come together. But of course, we would like to learn more about how we sustain this in the phase beyond the immediate crisis into the recovery now. And now we are putting all this energy together to put together a COVID economic recovery plan. And we see already that lessons learned from the crisis have helped us to work together on the assessments. We were not as close to the IFIs before. Now we are going to hold a joint symposium. We were not close with Economic Commission for Africa before. Now UNDP, Economic Commission, everybody, WTO, we are putting together this. So I can stop here, then I can come to questions. Yeah. And just to let you know that I might leave early because I have another similar event at 17 hours. Our time.
Thanks so much, Christine. And I think that message about how COVID-19 has absolutely brought people around the table. The threat is so great and so urgent that suddenly it becomes a priority for all, and people sit around the table and they act. And the question I guess we will be sort of coming to is how do we make the SDGs as urgent almost as COVID-19? We have a decade left. How do we build on that momentum to drive forward partnerships? Parfait, from your side as an academic, what have you observed in terms of clearly we hear about the rapidity, the speed at which action is happening. We can understand why. Moving with what can we learn from that, do you think, moving forward?
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm going to emphasize just a few principles. I can talk about examples later. And I'm going to start from the point that you made, which I thought was really a fundamentally interesting point. That crises that have this dual nature of being a danger and an opportunity, or bringing people together, but also potentially pulling them apart. And so the crisis provides the energy for people to come together, to band together, to try to find the solution together, but they don't necessarily provide a framework for orderly action. And so in order to have harness this energy and build an orderly framework for action so that that energy can be channeled into productive directions, I think you need a couple of essential conditions. The first is that you have to bring together three key institutions or dimensions. Sometimes you call it science policy interface, but it's broader than this. You have to bring together the world of ideas and science with the world of the bureaucracy, the administrators, the implementers, and then the funders. So these three groups have to somehow come together. And you have to manage their impulses and their motives together because they operate under different principles. They have different subcultures. They have different operating principles. And for the partnership to work, each of these units has to give and learn to do things anew. So from the world of bureaucracy and academics, the learning that has to happen in order to be effective is to learn to cut the red tape, just do things more efficiently, streamline processes, and so forth. From the world of science, what we need to do is to cut the jargon and to cut the gobbledygook, right? Essentially go to the core of the knowledge that is important, that is practical, that is actionable. And also not be afraid to draw from different veins of science, different areas and so forth. So the administrators cut the red tape, the scientists cut the jargon, and then the funders would have to cut some of the strings that are too tightly attached with the funding. You have to have the flexibility to innovate and to try to find new solutions, to make occasional mistakes, but at least to have the flexibility to adjust on the fly. And so this is sort of my opening gambit.
I mean, thank you. This is exactly what we want. We want how to make this happen moving forward. How do we continue to build on that momentum? And those are three excellent points around how science and ideas, bureaucracy, and funders need to work differently, and bringing business into this now as sort of an additional stakeholder. And I'm going to add one other element, which you didn't mention here, Parfait, though I know I've seen it in your work, which is that element of trust across all of these parts, these different elements of society. And I mean, Scott, we saw when COVID-19 hit, we saw companies, or many companies, stepping up and playing an incredibly strong role, often using their core business or even adapting the way they work in order to tackle COVID-19. And we saw some companies not doing this. We saw some companies laying off workers, and basically it's almost like there's a divide between those companies who felt, yes, we're all in it together, and doesn't matter about profits this year. We need to invest in this, and other companies who are trying to safeguard profits, and then we're not all in it together with them. How, in terms of moving forward, that element of trust is going to be hugely important, is it not?
Absolutely. Thank you, Darian, for the introduction and thinking about business in different ways, that it's not one big monolith. And let me also, thank Lotte for putting this together and showing the resources that I think are really excellent in terms of the guidebook and the research pieces and the whole framing. The question that we do have, though, which I think you hit right at the bullseye, if I can say, is trust. And how do we build trust? I've been in 6 different sectors, more or less. I mean, I started in academia. I worked for a not-for-profit implementing agency for USAID. I then worked at U.S. Agency for International Development. I worked in private sector with 2 big multinational companies. Now I'm both back in academia and also with business partners for sustainable development, which in the intro you mentioned was a part of the U.S. Council for International Business. Now, these organizations at the Council have been partaking with the UN through ECOSOC status and other areas for years. But the issue now is not just doing this at the global level, and I think the presentations thus far on the national level are quite key. So how do we bring the different sectors together? Professor Parfait did an excellent job of reminding that we have to think differently, and we have to think quickly, and we have to figure how can we leverage SDG 17, Goal 17 of partnerships, into addressing COVID-19. So business has tried to step up. We've tried to have some convenings. I can come back and speak specifically. But in the research that we've been doing, including global survey research, we have found, in following the scientists and others, that we won't be back to the next normal or full recovery until there's a vaccine. And if there is a vaccine, what good is it if people don't take it? So we're trying to get business and others involved throughout civil society, governments, and so forth, to realize, because our research is showing that maybe 2/3 of the people will take a vaccine if it were available, if it were accessible, if it were equitably distributed. So a lot of ifs. So the likelihood of that happening in an orderly fashion is not as high as we would like. So anyway, I'll come back and speak later specifically, but our research has shown that people would like the government and business community to work together. They believe that it is the synergies that are necessary for success, and yet, there's only upside opportunity. So, these kind of fora, and the whole week of high-level political forum, where we are participating in as many events as we can to show the bona fide nature of business to be part of the solution and to be at the table on providing innovative ideas. And it's not just the financing, which obviously has been well said that there's other donors and governments and others that have a gap to fill. But we're in this together, so it's not like we're going to be doing this as recipients as well. So hope to come back and appreciate the dialogue thus far.
Thank you, Scott. And moving to Kingsley, your experience within Liberia, listening to what Scott just said, people want government and business to be working together, of course, with civil society as well. How does that work in Liberia? Do you find this groundswell of action from companies coming to the table? Do you see that people are wanting to work collaboratively? What does it look like in the field? I think you're on mute. You can unmute yourself.
Yes, can you hear me? Thank you very much for the opportunity. To answer that question directly, let me just say a couple of words to situate a bit your question in the context of Liberia. Because what is very important in what you can do in every country is also what you call the collective mental reference that the people have. And in Liberia, this played a significant role in whatever we did. The first point about this is that you may recall that in 2015 to about 2017, Liberia had gone through a horrendous epidemic, which in fact became sub-regional. 3-4 countries happened to be facing this epidemic. And therefore, the first thinking about the pandemic was this reference hark back to what they had experienced. Probably not too rightly, they equated the pandemic, COVID, with the experiences that they had under Ebola. So one probably good thing is that they knew how horrible the epidemic of Ebola was. And they also knew that for them to be able to beat Ebola, they needed a well-coordinated, multi-sectorial response, that the collective action was imperative, that every sector of the society had to be on board, whether public, private, or just the communities. Everybody must work together to respond, adapt, and bring their unique resources to the fight. They also understood that the coordination of the efforts and the innovative collaborations within and across the societal sectors were really essential. And that was to work at every level. They couldn't beat Ebola until such time that the communities in their smallest level of existence could contribute towards fighting that pandemic. The second lesson reference that they had, which unfortunately was not exactly what, Ebola was not in any way like the pandemic, COVID, was that international community threw a lot of money at Ebola because it was in a very, specific context, limited area. And therefore, lots of money came in. And therefore, this time, the government and the people and the public service in general believed that it was an opportunity for huge sums of money to come in. And that didn't happen because not only was the country already in serious and dire straits as far as finance is concerned, it is in IMF, it had not recovered from Ebola. We were in the tight grip of an IMF program, so public finances were not available. Business was about to recover, hadn't fully recovered. People were recovering their resources, they hadn't fully recovered. And so the whole idea that money was coming in was totally misplaced. And therefore, whatever structures that we put in place, we needed to make sure that we take this new perspective into consideration. The good thing is that the government, in anticipation, maybe learning from what had happened in China and Europe at that time, had put up quickly a response program, very quickly. Unfortunately, the response program suffered from what I just said earlier on, that it believed that responses, financial support was going to come. When we realized, and the government did the right thing to bring all of us on board, brought the donor partners, the private sector, the international and national government organizations, everybody on board in the planning of this. But in less than a month or two, we realized the system wasn't going to work. So we, the UN, had to work very closely with the executive branch of the government to set up a new system. And the new system was that the president had to appoint one person as the national response coordinator to lead the executive committee on coronavirus, and she coordinates the Liberian COVID multi-sectorial response plan in partnership with the UN, in very close partnership with the UN and other development partners, the Ministry of Health, Africa's Institute of Liberia, and also the public service, the private sector, which also came in quickly. Now, let me say this: the importance of having UN and the donors deeply involved in the second planning and the institutions that we have put in was that when Ebola struck and there was so much money, after it's all ended, we realized that the country hadn't been very efficient in the utilization of its resources, and a lot of corruption charges had to emerge. So this time, the international community, the UN, had to be very central in this and become the element of trust for the whole community and for people who were working. So we also set up the Liberia Private Sector Executive Committee, which provided a non-partisan multi-affiliation knowledge sharing forum and has established a platform for donations. So most of the money we're getting coming from donations, coming from the UN reprogramming is budget, and from the donors giving in a bit here and there, and mostly from the World Bank, IMF, and the African Development Bank, who are all chipping in and helping us respond to it.
Okay. Thank you. And I think what's really interesting is that the fact that you had Ebola had meant that you had already had this sort of experience. Yes. That you knew that you had to bring all the sectors together as an absolute first response, and other countries perhaps took longer to appreciate and realize that, and certainly many countries like my own, the UK, didn't really understand this and understand about the need to work at the local level and engage all resources that we have collectively to tackle COVID-19. Now, I'm going to come to you in a moment, Gabby, with a really quite a hard question, because on the Q&A, Robert has asked a question, which is what kind of partnerships against COVID-19 are we actually focusing on? Because the current situation, we have majority of lost jobs, companies have closed, there's a majority have no access to food, majority can't afford medical care, etc. So I'm not going to focus on COVID-19 reaction, but building on what Robert asks in terms of when we're talking about building back and trying to deal with some of these huge issues, massive shock to society. What are you seeing within the global compact and the companies that you work with and the UN agencies that you work with, and that desire to work collectively to genuinely tackle some of these huge, deep-seated challenges?
Thank you, Darian. And first, thank you all and Desa for inviting me to be part of this such a relevant conversation. Your question, of course, it touches at the core of the work that we do at the Global Compact. I'm part of the team of partnerships with a special focus on the local level, and as part of my work, I'm leading the support that Global Compact gives to partnership officers inside the resident coordinator offices on the ground, to really foster partnerships with the private sector and through our local networks. So from the pandemic and from the challenges that we have been seeing the past few months, we have had the opportunity to really look at very good examples of how all these multi-stakeholder are coming together in really innovative and creative ways. I can speak to some of the good examples that we've had in different regions. I would like, for example, mention an example in Paraguay, where the whole UN country team partnered with the Ministry of Health, the government, and our Paraguay local network. They came all together to identify which are the specific needs that the country would need in response to COVID. And from there, they identified the solutions, bringing all these stakeholders to support the main challenges that the country will face. For example, they came together to support on health, health materials for hospitals, also on food support to vulnerable communities that were being impacted by COVID. So it's really been a privilege to see how these stakeholders are coming together in different ways. I would like to mention the example of Indonesia, the local network on the ground, with support with the Resident Coordinator Office and the UN country team, also came together and brought the private sector to provide PPE supplies in support of COVID. So there are many good examples. Difficult to say what are the just to number a specific focus of each of the partnerships, because each of the country has a specific challenges. But the important thing is to bring all these stakeholders together, have a conversation between them, assess the situation of the country, and really identify how they can support and what are the strengths and where the private sector and other stakeholders can bring to these solutions.
And of course, Kingsley mentioned the role of the UN, and as we know, the UN system has been reorganized in a way which can be sort of very positive to be able to make this happen. Through the Resident Coordinator's Office is now being set up with a partnership officer who's working with the Global Compact, but also working with multiple sectors of society to try and drive partnerships forward. So from now, any of the panel, and please do just put up your hand so I can see. In terms of these mechanisms that are sort of the longer term, the rebuilding back from COVID-19, we are talking about significant shifts in societies that are required. And of course, we've seen great work around where companies have come in and sort of supported PPE, etc. But honestly, that is minor in comparison to the fundamental shifts that we need to make in our societies to ensure the future prosperous economy, healthy societies, and a prosperous environment. So what are the mechanisms and how do we make that fundamental shift that actually, in a way, the SDGs have already given us this blueprint, as I mentioned? How do we make that happen? Kingsley, please.
Yes. In this respect, let me just say what we've been doing. At the very initial stage, when we helped the government to establish its own framework and plan and structures for combating the epidemic, we also in the UN put up our own plan, and our own plan consisted of 3 sort of pillars. The first one was to attack straight on the health crisis. And the second was to look at the socio-economic impact, which are the immediate impacts and which may tend to weaken the foundations that we've put in there already to be able to move onto the SDGs. And therefore, what we did was that whatever amount of money we reprogrammed to fight COVID, we made sure that what was left was in a very strategic manner put in place so that as soon as we are in the position to recover, we would use that to move us on forward quickly. And in fact, this is what we intend to do in the next couple of weeks. We are shifting gear more towards giving emphasis to the recovery and to the development, and especially into relaunching the SDGs, which we have put a bit on the back burner for a couple of months. The president himself has agreed that COVID is going to be with us for a long time, and that we suffered a lot because the economy was shut down. And this is a very poor country in the grips of IMF program. And therefore, any more time spent just maintaining the lockdown was going to seriously affect the economy. So he himself had given us the task of working with the donors, the INGOs, the NGOs, the government, and yesterday we met to see how we can make the Liberians learn to live safely with the virus. And therefore, we'll continue gradually to open up the economy and we'll be able to support, therefore, the economy and the effort. So we are shifting effort now more and more towards SDGs. Originally, we had put, we have some structure that we put together as the UN, the government, and the international partners, which we call the cooperating partners forum group, cooperating partners group. We had set up part of it to deal with the crisis. Now we are putting in all the UN and the NGOs and everything in to be able to now start the coming few weeks, move on to start the implementation of the SDGs as part of recovery. But one lesson that we learned from what happened.
Sorry, Kingsley, I'm going to interrupt just to bring in as many views as possible. But yeah, that really interesting. The setups you've got. We've got Fatmir and then Parfait. Fatmir.
Yeah. I think your question was related to how do we address, or how, even in a crisis time, we might address the SDGs goals and not leaving from the path that we have already agreed on. Actually, as I was hearing the other panelists, it came out to my mind what we have passed in these 4 months. And actually the dialogue that we have created enabled us to build a trust among all the stakeholders, which is crucial to understand that the policy and the measure created by the government are the measures and policies that will help those who are in most need at this moment, and the sectors that are in the most need at this moment. And building trust is something that is a key, I would say, from this process. Moreover, there are 3 things that I would like to, as well to address, and that's that the dialogue throughout the COVID is actually providing consensus between different stakeholders on policies and measures that you undertake in order to mitigate the crisis. Mm-hmm. And being consensus is something that is I would say a crucial one. And 2 other things are being comprehensive and consistent in policy making. And we actually achieved in North Macedonia saying that and creating policies and measures, emergency measures that are consistent towards addressing the SDG goals in one side, but as well actively and directly respond to the needs of the crisis.
Great, thank you. So yes, consistent, clear policy goals. It sounds like engaging all stakeholders, building up that trust. Parfait, and then Christine, and then Scott. Parfait.
So quickly, I'd like to return to one of the themes that you announced earlier, which is to say that this decade is a decade of transformation. In other words, countries, institutions cannot afford business as usual. We need to profoundly change the way we operate, and we need to change the form of institutions. But nobody changes unless they have to. And so this crisis is an opportunity to change. And there are a few institutions that actually, especially in sub-Saharan African context, were at a breaking point at a time when they needed to change. And one of the institutions that I want to refer to is the education system, which faced quite a number of challenges with the content, just sort of making this match between the content of the training and the needs of the labor market in terms of the quantitative mismatch, the number of people trained versus the demands in the labor market, in terms of pedagogy, how you teach students, how you use new technology. And so this is going to...
How has COVID-19 then changed this or driven this agenda? Because what you're saying is all true. It was true a year ago. It was true 2 decades ago. What's changed?
Well, in terms of pedagogy, by just confinement, I think you were forced to explore new ways of teaching. And there's an initiative that I participated in that essentially made it possible to begin to leverage technology and bring sort of learning material and learning summaries to students while they are at home. Right. And so that is going to be an entry point for sort of a greater accelerated use of technology in teaching.
That's a great example. It's forced innovation that has happened, which we can then utilize.
Yeah.
For example, Christine, you're on mute. I'm afraid you're still on mute.
Sorry. Yeah, thank you so much. And thanks for the opportunity again. I will talk and then I will have to go to another meeting. But what I wanted to say is that here in Mauritius and in Seychelles at the same time, I think the COVID, we've been talking about the SDGs, and we were actually into campaigns of the decade of action and accelerating. But sometimes you don't feel the sense of urgency in these things, it's as if it's, far away. But what COVID has done was to uncover all the problems and show the vulnerabilities, and then show us that the path that we were talking about of the SDGs actually makes sense. Look, something has hit us, and look at our health systems. We had to struggle to contain the virus. Hospital, we had to bring laboratory things, whatever, from universities because hospitals didn't have what they needed to do. Even the business people, we're talking about diversifying until it hit us that we cannot rely on tourism alone anymore because everything is shutting down because we have 1 or 2, 3 sectors. Greener economies, I could go on and on. Even gender equality, the COVID crisis brought lots of challenges with GBV, with, the Minister for Gender called us and said, we need a standing committee. But we needed this standing committee, even last year or the other year. So anyway, to make it shorter is that we were called at the Prime Minister's office here in Mauritius to discuss exactly what does it mean build back better, hooking to the principles that we thought didn't make sense then. At the same time in Seychelles at the VP's office to come to that. So lesson is that COVID is showing us that we made sense then, we make sense now. More things, more than COVID will come, are we ready? And then 2, we have to do it together. It makes sense to do it together.
Thank you, Christine. And along with those mechanisms that you're talking about, I want to know, and Scott, maybe you can address this with other comments. Can we see a permanent shift in the way that business understands its place, its role in society that perhaps COVID-19 has demonstrated? What's your feeling on that? And then whatever else you wanted to.
Well, thank you. And Professor Parfait did well mention a decade of transformation. And I think business has already seen that from both an investor side as well as individual businesses stepping up for social impact. But having said that, that doesn't mean it happens overnight. And it doesn't only happen at a global level, it needs to happen all the way at the local level. So not just big global international businesses, but also small and medium enterprises. And that's what we've been trying to foster with the U.S. Council for International Business Foundation and these meetings that we've had with Business Partners for Sustainable Development. We've worked with these other networks, International Organization of Employers, Business for Impact at the OECD, and others to try to get them on board on a global scale, but then it will be national impact through their national organizations. And the example I'll give is what we now call CONVINCE, COVID New Vaccine Information, Communication, and Education. CONVINCE. So we believe that, again, the vaccine is key to recovery and building back better. So the UK government through Wilton Park, on the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine, City University of New York, School of Public Health, UN, WHO, UNICEF, and so forth. We've had 2 dialogues, and we think now we're able to get this initiative up where we can create the tools and the opportunities to create the partnerships that I think you're referring to. It includes NGO, civil society, faith leaders in society, and so forth. But this we need to all do together. And it also means we need to leave some of the biases that we've held in the past. And business can't transform if business is not invited to participate in a meaningful way. So I think it's incumbent upon all of us to work together, and hopefully COVID-19 is the beginning to then still integrate into the whole global goals by 2030. Thanks for the opportunity to participate today.
No, thank you, Scott. And As we come to the last few minutes, if our panelists would kindly have a 30-second short sound bite that will sum up the entire hour's conversation already, that would be wonderful. So we'll come to each of you in just a moment. Wanted to just look at some of the questions. And one of the questions is addressed to you, Parfait. You mentioned different sectors needing to leave behind behaviors and jargon. Do you have a real life example of where you've seen this happen?
Sectors where you leave jargon? Yes, I think it's a training it's a sort of professional challenge for scientists in general, to be able to boil down their knowledge into actionable programs. But there's sort of a cottage industry that exists already of programs that help scientists do just that. You have a lot of policy communication institutions that actually can serve as brokers.
And then, I mean, maybe Fatma, maybe you'd be able to answer for governments. Do you have examples where governments have been able, or your government has been able to shed some of the red tape, some of the bureaucracy, to be able to make things happen at faster speed?
Yeah, actually, it's interesting because we are among the rare countries where we didn't have the full governance, because we did have the technical government coping with the crisis because of the election that was planned to be organized in the middle of the pandemic, and therefore we needed actually to have an emergency situation in all the country in order to be able to respond. And that actually made us or gave us the opportunity to shorten the administrative barrier and bureaucracy in order to fast react on the crisis. But no matter of that, I would just maybe end that each crisis should be seen as an opportunity, and actually our government has seen it as an opportunity in creating plans on transforming the Macedonian economy, using the space which is made available probably in the global market. And moreover, we just last week, we adopted the strategic outcomes for the UN Cooperation Framework 2021-25, in which we will try to accelerate achievement of the SDGs in the next period, which is actually coping with the crisis and looking forward to the opportunities and as well to the better society.
Thank you, Fatma. So as we move to sort of last thoughts, I'm just going to bring in one of the questions from Mamadou Diallo. So beyond international level engagement, what about the issue of local capacity to engage dialogue among these institutions? And again, global compact local networks, I guess, have a very strong role to play here, as does the RCO. Don't know if Gabriele, you wanted to mention anything about that, and then basically 30-second statements from each of you.
Yes, thank you, Darian. Absolutely. So for what we just finalized conducting some interviews to the partnership officers. We started with Latin America and what we're hearing on the ground is that, as we all mentioned during this panel, is that we need fast track partnerships in support of COVID. So our insights are which companies are better equipped to partner and to really be able to partner in this quick reaction that we need to support countries. So we at the Global Compact, we really do think that companies that base their activities in a principle-based approach, human rights, environment, labor, anti-corruption, if they really do have a commitment on that, they are partner ready to support the COVID-19 pandemic in the short term, but also in the long term, supporting countries and supporting businesses. If they really do have this principle-based approach, they will be able to just react quickly and be able to partner with all stakeholders.
And be able to demonstrate that we are all in it together, because they are then a positive part of society, so others will want to work with them. Thank you very much. Kingsley,
yeah,
just a 30 seconds.
Yes, in a simple words, what we're saying is that government and all stakeholders should strategically work with the private sector to empower the communities by helping them build human capital, because that is the secret for achieving the SDGs and for protecting the people.
Thank you. Scott.
Thank you. As mentioned, Business Partners for Sustainable Development is a new entity thinking long-term of engagement with multi-sectors around the world. But we have to think global, but like always, there's both national and local opportunities. So we hope to create the tools, work with in fact, your accelerator pieces that Lotta started with. There's lots of ways that we could hopefully interact and bring in both local and national entities and put the thinking. I think Professor Parfait said, how do you bring innovation to the table? We would like to be able to do that as best we can and be able to do this in an appropriate way, not only for COVID-19, but building back better in so many ways. So thank you again for participating today.
Thank you, Scott. Fatmir, last words before Parfait.
Well, my last things would be actually that let's try to see this crisis really as an opportunity, because it learned us quite a lot of things, that how harmful we are, and especially that if every national economy or national government is looking on solving the problems on itself. And probably we might have to see globally how different partners throughout the globe has to interact much more in response of the new and possible threats to the economy and to the and the life of the people.
Great, thank you. Parfait.
I think my comment is mostly to sort of recognize and congratulate you for this effort. What I see as really valuable is your SDG Acceleration Action Framework, which I take is a very grassroots effort. And I think there's value in knowing more about this effort more broadly, but also about bringing it a little bit into context, understanding a little bit, creating a typology, but also adding context to see what actions would matter, would make a difference in what sector and in what kind of situations and countries. And so adding this grassroots effort with a sort of not a vetting, but at least sort of an analysis that would contextualize the ideas would be really something very valuable.
Fantastic, thank you. Yeah, one to continue conversations on. So with that, I think that it's been, from my perspective, a hugely rich discussion. Thank you all very much indeed for bringing all of your wise perspectives to the table. I think that we've heard clearly that COVID-19, yes, has been a huge threat, but also provides something of an opportunity for us to be able to build back better. I think we've had the clarity that it has to be an all of society approach. And for that to happen, we have to feel that we're all in it together. We have to build up the trust across sectors. We have to have those dialogues. We have to have those mechanisms that bring us together in order to really try to drive forward the priorities in each country. So with that, I'd like to thank again all of the panelists. Thank you all of the attendees as well. And we will ensure to get a recording of this out to you as soon as we can. Thank you all very much indeed.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.